at 3:17 a.m. November 8th, 2024, 64-year-old port employee Harry Doyle loaded the final duffel bag crammed with $15.4 million in cartel currency into his fishing vessel. For 3 decades, harbor security cameras never spotted him once. By daybreak, he'd vanished into the Pacific haze. But the black SUVs circling the wharf weren't officers. They were cartel enforcers. And Harry had just breached their ultimate line. And here's the part that will shock your mind. Harry didn't merely grab the currency. He placed something in that empty shipping container that made the cartel assume they were being betrayed by one of their own. If you're already captivated, hit that subscribe button and like this video so more people can hear this account. Because once you hear how Harry executed this off, you won't believe how it ends. But this account didn't commence with a seasoned port employee stealing millions from the criminal enterprise. It commenced 3 years earlier when Harry Doyle observed something that would transform his tranquil retirement plans forever. Harry had toiled the docks for 30 years, the final 12 as manager of Terminal 7 at the Port of Los Angeles. At 62, he was a third-generation stevedore who comprehended every inch of the waterfront. His grandfather had toiled these same docks during World War II. His father, during the boom years, Harry was set to retire to Costa Rica, but his divorce had seized half his savings, and his pension would barely cover basic expenses. That all shifted on a Tuesday evening in March 2021. Harry was in his office at Terminal 7 performing his routine end-of-shift paperwork when he observed irregularities in containers marked agricultural machinery from Panama. The weight manifest didn't align with the declared cargo. A shipment of farm tractors shouldn't weigh double what the paperwork indicated, and the routing made no economic sense whatsoever. Most employees would have shrugged and proceeded on. Weight irregularities happened all the time. Clerical mistakes, rounding errors, equipment failures. But Harry had always been detail-focused, perhaps excessively so. His ex-wife used to say it was why he'd never been promoted higher. He cared excessively about getting things precisely right. Instead of ignoring it like most employees would, Harry decided to examine. Over the next 3 weeks, Harry methodically studied these shipments using his manager access. He compared weight records, cross-referenced shipping companies with legitimate exporters, and tracked routing patterns. The containers traveled from Panama to Hong Kong, then to Macau. Why would farm machinery go to Chinese casinos? Everything about these shipments suggested fraud. Harry deliberately positioned himself near the specialized crews handling these containers during his regular rounds. He spoke adequate Spanish from 30 years of working with Latino dock employees to understand basic conversations. After careful observation over several shifts, he overheard the conversation that changed everything. One employee said to another, "These containers have $3 million each. Dirty currency going to the casinos to launder it." Harry's blood went cold. This wasn't agricultural machinery, it was a massive financial fraud operation, and he'd been unknowingly facilitating it for months, possibly years. That evening, sitting in his modest apartment in San Pedro, Harry calculated he'd personally supervised the movement of over $200 million in criminal enterprise currency in the past year alone. His annual salary was $78,000. The mathematics was infuriating and enlightening in equal measure. Then he found something that made his blood run cold. While reviewing old shipping manifests, Harry discovered his name forged as the authorizing manager for a container that didn't exist in port records. Someone was using his credentials for illegal shipments, making him an unwitting accomplice to federal crimes. Harry realized he had 2 options: report it to authorities and become a target for both the criminal enterprise and corrupt officials who might be involved, or find a way to make the system work for him. After 30 years of moving other people's wealth while barely surviving himself, Harry chose option 2. Back in his apartment, Harry used his legitimate access to study the criminal enterprise's shipping patterns with methodical precision. Containers arrived every 2 to 3 weeks on specific cargo ships, always routed through Terminal 7 during his shifts. Each container spent exactly 18 hours in temporary storage before re-export. Harry identified the critical weakness. During that 18-hour window, they were his responsibility. Missing inventory wouldn't be noticed until the next port thousands of miles away. He ordered authentic-looking custom seals through a contact in Long Beach, a man named Miguel, who supplied replacement security equipment for half the terminals on the West Coast. Harry claimed he needed extras for training purposes. Miguel didn't ask questions. Harry studied the criminal enterprise's container numbering system, learning to identify the specific codes that mark currency shipments versus legitimate cargo. He mapped every security camera blind spot in the storage yard, timing his walks to understand sight lines and coverage gaps. He identified which crane operators worked, which shifts, and which ones could be trusted to follow orders without asking questions. Most importantly, Harry created legitimate reasons to access problem containers. Safety inspection required due to improper weight distribution, customs hold pending document verification, equipment malfunction requiring container repositioning. All perfectly reasonable explanations that appeared in official logs. For his first test, Harry selected a container marked for 6 a.m. departure to Hong Kong. The shipping manifest listed agricultural machinery bound for a farm supply company in Kowloon. Harry knew better. At 2 a.m. on a moonless Thursday evening, he used his manager keys to move the container to Maintenance Bay 7 for routine inspection. The bay was positioned perfectly. No cameras, no foot traffic, completely isolated from the main terminal operations. Inside were 3 waterproof cases containing $1.2 million in currency. Harry's hands trembled as he opened the first case with bolt cutters. Stacks of hundreds, vacuum sealed and pristine. More currency than he'd ever seen in one place. Each stack was bound with currency straps and packed with military precision. Harry had planned to take one entire case, but fear overcame greed. He took only $50,000 from one case, carefully recounting the remaining stacks to match the original pattern. He resealed everything with his counterfeit custom seal and concealed the currency in a waterproof bag behind electrical panels in the port maintenance building, a location only a longtime manager would know existed. At 4:30 a.m., just as Harry was finishing the resealing process, a surprise security patrol found him near the container. "Hey, Harry, you're here early," called out Jimmy Santos, a guard Harry had worked with for 15 years. "Just finishing the weight inspection," Harry explained, his heart pounding so hard he was sure Jimmy could hear it. "Found some improper loading. These Panama crews don't follow protocols." Jimmy checked Harry's paperwork. Everything looked legitimate, proper forms, correct signatures, official inspection stamps. Those agricultural shipments have been odd lately, always seem to have problems. "Tell me about it," Harry replied, forcing himself to sound casual. "I swear they load these things with their eyes closed." Jimmy walked away, unaware that $50,000 in illegal currency was concealed in Harry's toolbox, wrapped in oil-stained rags and spare electrical fittings. The test container reached Hong Kong without incident, but over the following weeks, Harry noticed increased security around the agricultural machinery shipments, additional guards, more frequent inspections, longer processing times. Someone suspected something, but they didn't know what or who. Harry waited 2 months before his next operation, studying the new security protocols and adapting his methods accordingly. The delay was agonizing, but necessary. Patience was the difference between success and federal prison. Over the next month, Harry developed a systematic approach. Starting with a successful $50,000 test, he gradually increased his takes. Months 1 through 2, $25,000 to $75,000 per theft, testing different methods. Months 3 through 6, $100,000 to $200,000 per operation as confidence built. Months 7 through 12, $300,000 to $500,000 thefts using perfected techniques. Harry developed rotating schedules, created legitimate work orders, and timed operations during shift changes. His 30 years of experience became his greatest weapon. He knew which employees asked questions versus which followed orders blindly. During a $150,000 theft in month 4, customs agents arrived for an unscheduled inspection. While Harry was inside the container, counting currency by flashlight, he heard their voices outside and realized he had less than a minute before discovery. Harry quickly activated a fire alarm in another section of the port using a maintenance override code, creating an emergency that diverted all available security personnel. While customs agents and guards responded to the emergency, Harry escaped through a service tunnel that connected the container storage area to the main terminal building. 15 minutes later, the fire department declared the alarm a false activation caused by electrical problems. Harry was found in his office, apparently working late on scheduling reports with grease-stained hands from fixing the faulty alarm system. Harry's methods became increasingly sophisticated with each operation. He developed rotating schedules to avoid creating patterns that might be detected by analysis software. He created legitimate maintenance work orders weeks in advance that justified his presence at specific locations during specific times. Most importantly, Harry learned to time his operations during shift changes and meal breaks when human oversight was at its minimum. He knew that between 2:15 and 2:45 a.m., exactly one guard patrolled the entire storage yard. Through careful observation, Harry realized the criminal enterprise's operation was even bigger than he'd initially thought. Currency flowed through multiple terminals across 3 West Coast ports: Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Oakland. The operation processed an estimated $50 million monthly, making Harry's thefts a tiny percentage of the total volume. Corrupt port officials were already on the enterprise's payroll, explaining how such massive illegal shipments moved through supposedly secure facilities without detection. Harry identified at least 3 customs agents and 2 port authority managers who received regular payments for selective blindness. Harry became meticulous in ways that surprised him. He studied maritime law to understand legal vulnerabilities, learned basic Spanish to understand overheard communications, and created detailed records of every theft for future leverage. But signs emerged that the criminal enterprise was getting suspicious. New security protocols were implemented without explanation: biometric scanners, random container inspections, extended storage times that disrupted Harry's carefully planned operations. Unfamiliar faces appeared among the dock employees, asking casual questions about irregular procedures. Electronic tracking devices began appearing on high-value containers, sophisticated GPS units that transmitted real-time location data to enterprise security teams. Harry discovered these during routine inspections and realized the net was closing around whoever was responsible for the losses. Then Harry made a discovery that chilled him to the bone. Hidden inside one of his stolen currency bundles was a GPS tracker the size of a coin transmitting his location to whoever was monitoring the signal. The criminal enterprise wasn't just suspicious. They were actively hunting for the leak, and they were getting close. The enterprise's response was swift and professional. They brought in Markus Volkov, a former Russian intelligence officer who specialized in finding leaks in criminal enterprises. Volkov had worked for the FSB before freelancing his services to the highest bidder. His reputation was legendary. He always found his target, and that target was never seen again. Volkov's first action was to analyze every container delay, route change, and administrative error for the past 2 years using sophisticated data analysis software. He was looking for patterns that human investigators might miss, correlations between timing, personnel, and missing inventory. Harry adapted to the increased security with the same methodical approach he'd used to develop his theft techniques. He installed his own surveillance equipment to monitor criminal enterprise activities, hiding cameras and listening devices in locations only a longtime port employee would know existed. During an $800,000 theft in month 8, Volkov appeared for a surprise inspection while Harry was inside the container counting currency by flashlight. Harry heard footsteps approaching the container entrance and realized he had less than 30 seconds before discovery. Harry quickly stuffed currency into his tool bag, then grabbed his structural analysis equipment and pretended to be checking container wall integrity for stress fractures, a legitimate safety concern that explained his presence inside the container. "Why is this container delayed?" Volkov asked in heavily accented English when he found Harry inside. "Safety concerns with weight distribution," Harry replied, showing his clipboard full of technical measurements. "These Panama shippers don't follow proper loading protocols. If the weight shifts during transport, it can crush someone when we open the doors. I've seen it happen." Harry's explanation was so technical and boring, filled with engineering details about load balancing and structural integrity, that Volkov lost interest and walked away without conducting a thorough inspection. The Russian was looking for a thief, not a safety-obsessed bureaucrat. In month 12, while stealing $1.1 million during what should have been a routine operation, Harry triggered a motion sensor he didn't know existed. Security arrived within minutes, their radios crackling with urgent communications about unauthorized container access. Harry had already concealed the currency in a crane maintenance compartment 40 feet above ground, accessible only through service ladders that required special safety equipment. When security questioned him, he pointed to his legitimate crane inspection paperwork and explained he was testing load capacity systems as part of quarterly safety protocols. These cranes lift millions of dollars worth of cargo every day, Harry explained to the suspicious guards. If one fails because we skip maintenance, the lawsuits alone would bankrupt the Port Authority. That's why we do these inspections. Insurance requirements. The guards checked his documentation, found everything in order, and apologized for disturbing his work. They had no idea that $1.1 million in illegal currency was concealed directly above their heads in a maintenance compartment that officially didn't exist on any port blueprints. The stress began affecting Harry's health. Sleepless nights, paranoia about coworkers, constant calculation of escape routes. His hands developed a tremor, and he lost weight from the pressure. Harry discovered the criminal enterprise had put a $2 million bounty on information leading to the identity of their port problem. Several dock employees had already been questioned and released, but the interviews were becoming more aggressive and focused. The net was tightening around Terminal 7, and everyone who worked Harry's shifts was under suspicion. Miguel Torres, a crane operator who'd worked with Harry for 8 years, was held for 6 hours and questioned about unusual container movements during night shifts. Pete Williams was followed home by unmarked vehicles for a week. Even Jimmy Santos, the security guard who discovered Harry during his first theft, was investigated for possible complicity. By month 30, Harry had accumulated $12.8 million in various hiding spots throughout the port complex. The currency was becoming a liability rather than an asset, harder to conceal and transport, requiring more sophisticated storage solutions that increased his risk of discovery. Harry had concealed currency in decommissioned shipping containers in the salvage yard, sealed the bills inside waterproof containers attached to harbor pilings below the waterline, and created false compartments in Port Authority buildings that existed in architectural blind spots overlooked by security planners. The largest cache, $4.2 million, was concealed inside a crane boom that had been decommissioned after a structural failure but never removed from the port. Harry had access to the maintenance records showing the crane was scheduled for dismantling when budget permits, which in Port Authority language meant never. Then Volkov made his most aggressive move yet. He installed new biometric scanners and AI-powered surveillance systems that would track every person's movement through the port in real time. The system could analyze behavioral patterns, identify anomalies, and flag suspicious activity automatically. Harry had 72 hours before the system went live. 72 hours to retrieve his concealed millions and disappear forever, or abandon everything and run with whatever currency he could carry. The decision was made for him when a Pacific storm hit the coast, grounding air traffic and delaying dozens of ships. Emergency protocols gave Harry unprecedented authority to relocate containers for safety reasons, overriding normal security procedures and creating the chaos he needed for one final massive theft. During what would be his largest single theft, $2.8 million in month 28, FBI surveillance teams positioned themselves around the port. Without Harry's knowledge, federal agents had been monitoring criminal enterprise communications and identified references to a $15 million port problem that required immediate resolution. As Harry loaded currency into his boat using emergency evacuation procedures as cover, federal agents closed in from 3 directions. Their plan was to observe the theft in progress, gather evidence, then arrest Harry and offer him a deal to testify against the criminal enterprise. Harry spotted their communications equipment, distinctive antenna arrays, and encrypted radio chatter that didn't match Port Authority frequencies. Years of maritime experience had taught him to recognize different types of official presence, and this wasn't customs or local police. Harry used a foghorn to create confusion, blasting emergency signals that triggered automatic response protocols throughout the port. While federal agents tried to coordinate through the chaos, Harry escaped through underwater drainage tunnels he'd explored years earlier during routine maintenance operations. The tunnels connected the container storage area to storm drain outlets 3 miles away. Harry had always been claustrophobic, but desperation overcame fear as he crawled through pitch-black concrete tubes filled with decades of industrial runoff. The storm gave Harry one final opportunity that would either make him rich beyond imagination or get him eliminated. 3 Enterprise containers arrived simultaneously due to shipping delays, each containing approximately $4 million, according to his intercepted communications. He realized this was his chance for one massive theft before Volkov's new security system made future operations impossible. Harry spent weeks preparing for this final operation with the same meticulous planning that had made his smaller thefts successful. He studied weather patterns using maritime forecasting services, learning to predict optimal haze conditions that would provide natural cover for his activities. He mapped every security patrol route and timing down to the minute, identifying the precise windows when specific areas would be unguarded. He created false emergency scenarios that would divert attention from his target containers. Gas leaks, electrical fires, structural failures that would require immediate response from security personnel. Most importantly, Harry prepared multiple escape routes, including underwater passages that connected the port to the open ocean. He discovered these during maintenance diving operations and realized they could provide undetectable escape paths for someone with proper equipment and knowledge of tidal patterns. The storm operation required Harry to coordinate with emergency response teams without raising suspicion, maintaining his cover as a concerned manager during crisis operations. He had to move containers during limited visibility and communication blackouts using emergency protocols to override automated tracking systems. Harry needed to transport stolen currency during a port-wide security lockdown. Moving millions in funds through checkpoints designed to prevent exactly that type of activity, every step required split-second timing and perfect execution. Volkov had narrowed his suspects to 5 port employees, including Harry. The Russian was using the storm as cover to conduct intensive surveillance of each suspect, watching for unusual behavior during the emergency that might reveal the identity of his target. Volkov's team included former military specialists equipped with night vision technology and encrypted communications. They were positioned throughout the port, ready to converge on anyone who displayed suspicious behavior during the crisis. During the storm, Harry watched from a distance as Volkov personally interrogated Tommy Morales, a 22-year-old dock employee who was completely innocent but matched the suspect profile. The young man was terrified, visibly shaking as the Russian asked increasingly aggressive questions about container movements and security procedures. Tommy had a wife and infant daughter. He'd never stolen anything more valuable than office supplies. Watching his interrogation, Harry realized his actions had put dozens of innocent people at risk. The Enterprise's investigation was destroying lives, even when it didn't find the actual culprit. Harry made a decision that surprised him. He would accelerate his timeline, complete one final theft of unprecedented scope, and disappear before Volkov could harm anyone else. He would take responsibility for his actions rather than allowing innocent people to suffer for his crimes. Using storm conditions as perfect cover, Harry executed his most sophisticated operation yet. He routed 3 containers through a complex shell game using legitimate storm emergency protocols, moving them through the port's transportation network like pieces on a chessboard. Each container was officially relocated for storm safety reasons, moved away from areas vulnerable to flooding, wind damage, or structural collapse. The paperwork was perfect, the justifications were legitimate, and the storage locations were exactly where Port Authority emergency protocols dictated they should be. Harry extracted $11.2 million while maintaining perfect documentation that showed every action as necessary storm response. He created false damage reports that explained container delays and relocations as unavoidable consequences of the natural disaster. The currency was transferred to his boat using emergency evacuation procedures designed to remove valuable equipment from threatened areas. To any observer, Harry was following established protocols for protecting port assets during severe weather. As the storm cleared, Harry discovered Volkov had planted undercover operatives among the emergency response teams. Russian agents wearing Port Authority uniforms had been watching his every move during the operation, documenting his actions, and building a case that would lead to his capture or elimination. Harry realized they'd been one step ahead of him the entire time. Volkov hadn't been trying to catch him in the act. He'd been gathering evidence to present to Enterprise leadership, proving Harry's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. The endgame was approaching faster than Harry had anticipated. Volkov's new AI surveillance system would go online in 16 hours, making any future movement through the port impossible. Without detection, Harry had one final window to retrieve all his concealed currency and escape before the technology made his 30 years of experience worthless. Harry faced the most dangerous mission of his criminal career, visiting 7 different hiding spots across the port complex while avoiding both criminal enterprise surveillance and federal agents who were closing their own investigation. The locations contained his life's work: decommissioned container and salvage yard, $3.2 million, false bottom and maintenance shed, $2.8 million, waterproof cases and harbor pilings, $4.1 million, concealed compartment in his office safe, $1.9 million, emergency stash and abandoned warehouse, $2.7 million, backup location in Port Authority building, $700,000. Volkov had positioned surveillance on each location without knowing which one Harry would visit, but knowing he must retrieve currency from somewhere. It was a waiting game with life or death stakes, and the Russian had infinite patience and unlimited resources. Harry used his final legitimate shift to mask the collection operation, creating the appearance of normal work while systematically emptying his secret currency caches. He created work orders requiring him to visit each hiding location for routine maintenance or inspection purposes. He used routine maintenance activities to access concealed currency, checking electrical systems that gave him access to wall cavities, inspecting structural elements that required opening sealed compartments, testing equipment that justified his presence in restricted areas. Harry transferred funds to his boat during legitimate port inspections, using his authority as manager to authorize equipment transfers and emergency relocations that moved currency without triggering security protocols. Throughout the operation, Harry maintained radio contact with dispatch, establishing normal behavior patterns and creating alibis for his movements. To anyone monitoring communications, he was conducting routine shift duties during a busy but unremarkable workday. At the 4th location, the abandoned warehouse containing $2.7 million, Harry almost walked into a surveillance team. He spotted the reflection of binoculars in a window across the storage yard and realized Volkov's agents were watching the building. Harry had to abort that pickup and adapt his plan, leaving $2.7 million behind to save his life. The decision was agonizing. More currency than most people earned in a lifetime abandoned because retrieving it meant certain elimination. Even under extreme pressure, Harry executed each remaining operation with the precision that had made him a successful manager for 12 years. Every movement was calculated, every decision based on 3 decades of port experience and 30 months of criminal expertise. While loading the final duffel bag containing the last $800,000 from his office safe, Harry heard vehicles approaching the administration building, multiple engines, coordinated arrival patterns, tactical deployment that meant professional operatives rather than law enforcement. Volkov's team had found him, but Harry had anticipated this possibility. He'd already cut his anchor line and started his boat's engine. The vessel was concealed behind shipping containers, invisible from the administrative building, but ready for immediate departure. As Enterprise gunmen reached the dock, Harry disappeared into Pacific haze, using a route he'd practiced dozens of times during legitimate fishing trips. The haze was so thick that visibility dropped to less than 50 feet, providing perfect natural cover for his escape. 20 minutes into his escape, radar showed Enterprise speedboats closing in from multiple directions. Volkov had anticipated Harry's escape route and positioned vessels to intercept him regardless of which direction he chose. Harry eliminated his engine and drifted silently through a shipping channel, using the massive hull of a cargo ship to block radar detection. The commercial vessel was over 900 feet long, creating a radar shadow that completely concealed Harry's small fishing boat. Enemy boats passed within 50 yards while Harry held his breath, their engines thundering through the haze like mechanical predators hunting for prey. Harry could hear radio chatter in Russian and Spanish as search teams coordinated their sweep patterns. Just as Harry reached what he thought was safe harbor near the Channel Islands, Coast Guard searchlights swept the area, responding to reports of suspicious maritime activity. Federal authorities had detected the unusual boat traffic and launched their own investigation. Harry faced an impossible choice: hide among the rocks and risk discovery by Coast Guard patrols, or make a run for his backup boat and risk capture by Enterprise hunters. He chose to wait, submerging his boat's profile among kelp beds until the Coast Guard moved on to search other areas. Harry pushed his fishing boat into the haze as Volkov's team reached the dock behind him. The criminal enterprise had speedboats waiting, fast, modern vessels equipped with radar and GPS tracking systems. But Harry had spent 40 years fishing these waters and knew every current, reef, and hiding spot that didn't appear on any chart. Harry's deep knowledge of local waters became his salvation in ways the Enterprise couldn't anticipate. He used haze patterns created by temperature differentials to mask his direction and speed. Understanding how marine weather moved through the channel system, he navigated by sound and instinct through shipping channels, identifying vessel types and directions by engine noise and wake patterns. Harry avoided main routes where Coast Guard patrols operated according to predictable schedules, instead following fishing paths used by local sportsmen and commercial operations. He headed for underwater caves and concealed coves known only to fishermen who'd worked these waters for generations. Volkov coordinated multiple vessels using GPS and satellite communications, but Harry's old fishing boat had minimal electronic signature. The 30-year-old vessel generated almost no radar reflection and transmitted no GPS data, making it nearly invisible to modern tracking technology. The chase became a deadly game of cat and mouse in zero visibility conditions. With Harry's decades of maritime experience pitted against the Enterprise's superior technology and numbers, Harry disabled his boat's electronics to avoid any possibility of tracking, navigating by compass, and dead reckoning techniques learned from his grandfather. His decades of experience reading ocean conditions, wind patterns, current changes, wave formations, gave him advantages over Enterprise hunters who relied entirely on electronic navigation. Multiple near misses occurred as Enterprise boats passed within yards of Harry's position. He used engine noise from commercial shipping traffic to mask his own boat sound signature, timing his movements to coincide with passing freighters and tankers. Maritime authorities detected the unusual boat activity and launched a full investigation, deploying multiple Coast Guard vessels and a helicopter with thermal imaging equipment. Harry had to avoid both the criminal enterprise and law enforcement while making his escape through increasingly crowded waters. After 36 hours without sleep and under extreme stress that would have broken most men, Harry pushed through exhaustion using sheer determination and survival instinct. He'd planned for this moment for months, preparing himself mentally and physically for the ordeal of escape. Harry reached a concealed cove near Channel Islands National Park, where he'd prepared a cache of supplies and a different boat for the next phase of his escape. The location was accessible only during specific tidal conditions and required intimate knowledge of underwater rock formations that could destroy a boat's hull. As Harry transferred duffel bags to his backup vessel, a faster boat with longer range and different registration, he discovered GPS trackers concealed in several currency bundles. Volkov had been tracking him the entire time, using the stolen currency itself as bait to lead him into a trap. The Enterprise's boats were converging on his location, their engines growing louder through the haze. Harry had minutes, maybe less, before professional operatives surrounded his position with no possibility of escape. The Coast Guard's investigation of unusual maritime activity triggered a federal task force that had been monitoring criminal enterprise communications for months. FBI agents intercepted references to a $15 million port problem and launched their own investigation. Realizing that something significant was happening in their jurisdiction, federal agents identified Harry as a person of interest, but didn't know if he was a victim, witness, perpetrator, or some combination of all three. They began surveillance of his known associates and properties, building a case file that would determine whether to arrest him or offer protection. Volkov faced increasing pressure from Enterprise leadership to resolve the theft quickly and permanently. His reputation depended on finding Harry, and recovering the currency and failure would result in his own elimination. The Russian was authorized to use any means necessary to complete his mission. Realizing he was being tracked through the currency itself, Harry went on the offensive for the first time in his criminal career. He planted false GPS signals using maritime emergency beacons, creating phantom targets that confused enterprise tracking systems and divided their search efforts. Harry used legitimate maritime emergency protocols to contact Coast Guard stations about suspicious vessels operating in violation of navigation safety rules. His reports triggered official investigations that forced enterprise boats to maintain distance or risk federal attention. Most importantly, Harry leveraged his knowledge of criminal enterprise operations to stay one step ahead of their tactics. He understood their communication patterns, operational procedures, and psychological profiles well enough to predict their next moves. Harry created multiple false trails to confuse tracking efforts, abandoning GPS devices in fishing boats heading to Mexico. While he escaped in the opposite direction, he used his maritime radio to broadcast false position reports that sent search teams toward empty ocean. Federal agents realized that Harry's information could potentially dismantle the entire West Coast financial fraud network that had operated with impunity for years. They decided to approach him with an offer of immunity and protection in exchange for cooperation against the criminal enterprise. Harry's theft had created problems far beyond the missing currency. Enterprise leadership questioned Volkov's competence and the security of their entire Pacific Coast operation. Internal conflicts developed as different factions blamed each other for the losses and the attention they'd attracted from federal investigators. The confrontation evolved into a three-way battle between advanced surveillance technology, 30 years of practical maritime experience, and federal resources backed by legal authority. The criminal enterprise used satellite tracking and AI analysis. Harry relied on traditional seamanship and local knowledge. The FBI employed modern investigative techniques and unlimited funding. Each side adapted tactics based on the other's moves, creating an escalating cycle of countermeasures and responses that pushed all participants toward an inevitable violent conclusion. Harry discovered that the criminal enterprise had been using port employee identities for illegal shipments for years, implicating dozens of innocent employees in financial fraud operations they knew nothing about. His theft had exposed a much larger conspiracy that threatened the lives and freedom of people who'd never committed any crime. Harry faced a moral decision that would define the rest of his life. He could choose personal escape and financial security, or he could protect his former co-workers from enterprise retaliation by accepting responsibility for his actions. The decision would determine whether he was remembered as a selfish thief or someone who ultimately did the right thing. FBI agents approached Harry's boat under cover of darkness, using Coast Guard vessels to mask their approach. Their intention was to offer protection and immunity in exchange for testimony that could destroy the Enterprise's West Coast operations. But they weren't alone in the dark waters. Enterprise operatives were simultaneously moving to intercept Harry, and federal agents found themselves caught between completing their mission and avoiding a firefight that could result in civilian casualties and international incidents. Harry found himself surrounded by FBI boats, criminal enterprise speedboats, and Coast Guard vessels. Each faction with different objectives and rules of engagement. The federal agents wanted him alive for testimony. The criminal enterprise wanted him eliminated to prevent that testimony. The Coast Guard wanted everyone to follow maritime law and return to port peacefully. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen used a maritime radio to contact Harry directly. Mr. Doyle, this is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We know what you've been doing, and we know why. We're prepared to offer you full immunity and witness protection in exchange for your cooperation against the financial fraud operation. Volkov's voice cut through the radio chatter in heavily accented English. Mr. Doyle, you have something that belongs to my employers. Return it along with your silence about port operations, and you'll live to see another sunrise. Continue this conversation with federal agents, and your future will be very unpleasant. The stolen currency had become secondary to Harry's knowledge of criminal enterprise operations accumulated over 30 months of systematic theft. He possessed detailed records of every theft, including evidence of port corruption, financial fraud techniques, shipping routes, and personnel involved in the conspiracy. News helicopters arrived as the standoff became public. Their searchlights turned the hazy ocean into a surreal theater. Harry's account captured national attention within hours. Dock employee steals millions from criminal enterprise while FBI watches. Harry made a decision that surprised everyone involved. He used his maritime radio to broadcast criminal enterprise operational details on emergency frequencies monitored by multiple agencies, ensuring the information became public record regardless of the standoff's outcome. This is Harry Doyle, Terminal 7 Manager, broadcasting on emergency frequency 121.5, Harry announced. For the record, I've been stealing currency from containers shipped by an international criminal enterprise through the Port of Los Angeles for 30 months. The currency was being processed through casinos in Macau. Port officials receiving illegal payments include. Harry's broadcast continued for 12 minutes, naming names, describing procedures, and providing evidence that would destroy the entire West Coast financial fraud network. Every word was recorded by federal agencies and broadcast live by news organizations monitoring emergency frequencies. Volkov's desperation reached a breaking point. Facing elimination by his criminal employers for failing to prevent Harry's broadcast, the Russian made a decision that escalated the confrontation beyond anyone's control. If I can't capture him, I'll eliminate all evidence of this failure, Volkov radioed to his team in Russian, unaware that FBI linguists were translating his communications in real time. Sudden flashes lit up the haze as charges detonated on 2 Enterprise speedboats. Volkov had decided to destroy the evidence of his failed operation rather than face the consequences of returning empty-handed. The explosions created chaos that allowed Harry to make his final escape. FBI agents realized Harry's broadcast had already accomplished their primary objective, exposing and destroying the criminal enterprise's financial fraud network. They offered him full immunity and witness protection, but Harry had his own plans. Agent Chen, I appreciate everything you've done, but I think I'll handle this situation myself, Harry transmitted as he started his boat's engine. The information I've provided should be sufficient for your investigation. Using his deep knowledge of local waters, Harry navigated through underwater caves and concealed passages known only to veteran fishermen who'd worked these waters for generations. Behind him, explosions continued to light up the haze as Enterprise operatives and federal forces engaged in the deadliest maritime confrontation in California history. 6 months later, a small charter fishing boat operated quietly in Costa Rican waters near the village of Tamarindo. The captain was known locally as El Gringo, a weathered American who spoke little Spanish, but knew these tropical waters better than anyone who'd fished them for decades. The question remained, did Harry Doyle disappear into federal witness protection under a new identity? Or did he simply vanish into the vast Pacific with enough currency to last several lifetimes? The FBI file remained classified. The criminal enterprise considered the case closed, and somewhere in Central America, an old fisherman watched the sunset and smiled. Harry's former manager found a handwritten note in the port manager's office. The system was rigged from the start. I just learned how to play by their rules. HD. The port continued operating. The currency kept flowing and new shipments arrived daily. But now everyone wondered how many other Harry Doyles were out there waiting for their chance. Subscribe if you think Harry Doyle was justified in stealing from criminals who were stealing from everyone else. Hit that like button if you believe sometimes you have to break the system to expose how broken it really is. And let me know in the comments if you discovered millions in dirty currency flowing through your workplace every day. Would you have done what Harry did, or would you have walked away? Because honestly, I'm not sure what I would have chosen.